Hello, my name is Pauline Miller from Personal Touch Funerals. So we've been inundated over the past couple of days with calls from clients who've got both lots of questions and concerns over the large changes that are happening concerning funerals at both crematoriums and cemeteries in light of the recent coronavirus, which is now social distancing is being practiced very, very heavily. We're closed this week. So that we are all self-isolating so that we can keep ourselves safe. We'll be reopening our offices back on Monday on a skeleton staff so that those of us who need to stay off can stay off longer, but so that we actually can give you a good service for those of you who need to see us. We'll be opening between the hours of 10 and 3. So a lot of information is coming out at the moment that's quite confusing, and it's changing very, very rapidly. And for many people who are dealing with a funeral, it's bad enough with what they're dealing with, let alone trying to take all this information in. So we thought it would be useful to give you a roundup of what's happening. That's going to be useful to help anyone who's planning a funeral or who knows of someone who's planning a funeral that needs this help and information, because you will need to follow these guidelines quite carefully. Your funeral director should advise you of some of this, but again, sometimes the mind just isn't thinking. So if you have this information beforehand, forewarned is forearmed, and that's what we're going to do. So I've got my notes here. I'm not trying to do a Cecil B. DeMille production. What we're wanting to do is to keep you safe and keep you informed. So I'm going to do 3 videos. This video here is just going to concentrate on those of you who are planning a burial. Okay, our second video will be for those of you who are planning a cremation. And the third one will look at the implications if your loved one has sadly passed away from the coronavirus, because the changes there are much more stringent and you will have to comply with them. And again, we know this is such an incredibly difficult time, but unfortunately, we've got to come to terms with these things and work with them. So we're here to help you make that process as simple as possible. So let's look first of all at the rules concerning a burial. So we've got 14 points that we're going to talk about, and we want to take you from the top right the way through in a timely fashion, so that you are fully aware of what is involved. So first thing is looking at booking of the burial with your funeral director. Whichever funeral director that you choose, previously, the cause of death was not really our main concern, but in light of coronavirus and the way that the cemeteries and crematoriums are reacting to this, you will need to tell us if your person passed away from the coronavirus or complications due to the coronavirus. This is particularly important if we've got to pick up a loved one from home, because what we have to ensure is that our ambulance crew are dressed appropriately and they ensure that they have safety not only for themselves, but for those of you who may be in the home, and also when they're going to take your loved ones away, that we are looking after them in an appropriate manner to ensure that we still keep their dignity, but we also are aware of the fact that we are dealing with someone who's passed away from an illness at the moment that we don't have a full handle on. So when we speak to you, we will be asking that question, and don't take offence. And I'm sure everybody else will be asking that question because it's critical. It's critical because when we now come to the second point, which is to book your burial with the cemetery, previously, once again, they didn't need a death certificate. They did want to know the cause of death, but it wasn't a major factor. But again, with the advent of coronavirus, they are now asking that specific question, because if the person has died by coronavirus, then the implications, there are much more stringent rules in place. And as I say, I'll go into that in greater detail for those of you that this affects in another one of my videos, but we're just going to stick with the burial at this moment in time. So we will need to find that information out from you so that we can actually let the cemetery know. And then we will in turn inform you as to what they say regarding the implications of that. All right. Okay, so on that note, previously we would say to a client, how long are you looking? When are you looking to plan your funeral? Things have changed now. The waiting times we know from the funerals we're booking at this moment in time are 3 to 4 weeks away minimum. We see that time expanding as we move forward, and sadly, with Corona, the death toll increases. So be patient is what we're saying. Don't come with a fixed time, because what we're now doing is ringing the cemeteries in question and saying, when's your next available date? Again, for the Afro-Caribbean fraternity, where we do feel, because of the way that we celebrate our funerals, we see a lot of the changes here impacting greatly on the Afro-Caribbean community. And so the waiting time aspect of things is important. And one of the things that we like is a Friday funeral, because we like the weekend. But again, start to open your minds to the fact that that's not possibly going to happen. It will be looking at the date that is available to us as soon as it is available to us. All right, so registering the death. There's a lot of variety of instructions going on around this one. Normally, you would register the death of the loved one in the borough that they lived in. And for the majority of the boroughs, you would need to ring through and make an appointment. There are those sometimes that you could walk into. There are others, I know, where the actual registry office is in the same building as, say, the hospital. However, again, with the advent of Corona, we are finding that many of them have withdrawn the telephone facility for you to make an appointment to see them. And some of those now are just giving you an online opportunity. Again, frustrating, but this again is changing on a regular basis. So what we'd advise you to do is to check with your borough first of all. What we have found out about is this thing called an out of district registration, which will again ease matters. So if your loved one, say for example, lived in the borough of Lambeth, but you live in the borough of Croydon, you could talk to Croydon and see if you can do an out of borough registration with Croydon for the Lambeth a resident. And what would happen is that Croydon would then take all the details. They would talk to Lambeth, get all the paperwork in place, which is primarily the death certificate stating the official cause of death, which you'll need for purposes like closing down banks and such. And also the green certificate, which is going to be critical to us funeral directors, because that is what we will need primarily to collect your loved one from the hospital, if that's where they've passed away, or from the coroners. And then that is a certificate we're going to need when the day of funeral comes about. But all of that can be done, we're understanding now, from this out of district registration, which I think is great. It just really will ease the problem of people not having difficulty getting an appointment. You could walk in before. We are being told not to do that. The social distancing, the minimizing of crowds is what everybody's trying to do. So they're not wanting there to be hordes of crowds of people, already in a state of panic, trying to get an appointment, you're going to, again, that word patience, you're going to have to keep ringing through, be prepared to hold on for a long time, but the objective is to get through, get yourself an appointment so that you can register your death as quickly as possible. All right. Again, there was a situation whereby some funeral directors were allowing their families to take the necessary paperwork that a cemetery needed to them. But again, that's one of the new rules now. All paperwork has to be delivered by funeral directors. And even with that, many of these cemeteries are closing their offices. They're inside working, but they don't want to have any contact with the general public. We as funeral directors are still general public, but when it comes to the delivering of papers, they want it only delivered by funeral directors. So again, another new change there. All right, so that's what's happening when you're telling us about the funeral, you're advising us to get your person. Let's look at now that we're actually dealing with the funeral for you.